Good morning, and welcome to another. Today is Monday, June the 10th, and I trust that you guys are waking up feeling refreshed and having a great day. Sun shining, everything is coming to life here, and I hope it's the same wherever you are. Some of you guys going through a little bit of a heat wave right now in certain parts of our country, but we've had some rain off and on, so things are a little wet. You might, as the wind blows, you might see some of the rain shaking off of the trees behind me. But we're given another day, and we get an opportunity to spend it together. So really grateful for that. Well, we're in week 7 of our series on the first of the book of First John, and can't believe it, but we're already into chapter 4, verses 1 through 6. If you this is just by way of reminder, if you go to bethanychurch.com and click in our sermon series tab on Illuminate, you'll discover there that there are devotionals for every week. So if this is one of the first times that you're coming to Seize the Day, there's a devotion that's written for every day of the week, and it all applies to this passage that we're studying for the week. So you'll find it there. And also, if you've missed a series or two, you can go back and you can follow the sermons. And then what we do is we post them not only on our website, but they're also posted on our YouTube channel, which is Bethany Church NH. So Bethany Church NH, and for New Hampshire, right? So Bethany Church NH. You can get on the YouTube channel, and you'll find all of the Seize the Days and everything on that channel as well. All right. So today, as I said, we're in week 7, looking at 1 John 1, 4 through 6. And I want to read to you a little of an illustration that I picked up this week as I was preparing for my sermon. I thought it was rather interesting. There was an article that appeared in a magazine, the Smithsonian. It was written by a woman named Teresa Nowakowski. And this is what she wrote. She said, separating fact from fiction is getting harder and harder. Manipulating images and creating increasingly convincing deep fakes is getting easier. As what becomes less clear, as what's real becomes less clear, authenticity is something we're thinking about, writing about, aspiring to, and judging more than ever. And then she mentioned that in the Merriam-Webster's word of the year, which I wasn't sure that they even did that, but every year they come out with a word. And this year, last year's word in 2023, Merriam-Webster's word of the year was authentic. Authentic. And at the end of the year, they announced that title, which was really interesting because this year's theme of searching for truth, right, seems fitting following last year's focus on manipulation. See, the 2002 word of the year was gaslighting. That's a colloquial term that kids use today, right, where it speaks about someone manipulating another using psychological methods, questioning their sanity, their memory, their powers of reasoning, right? So when you gaslight somebody, it's a term that is really trying to just confuse that other person or make that other person look really bad. So they're being gaslit. I found it interesting, and some of you who are watching may appreciate this, that term was originated from a 1938 play by a man by the name of Patrick Hamilton and was made popular in the American film Gaslight back in 1944, which starred Charles Boyer and Ingrid Bergman, Joseph Cotton. And in the play, a woman complains that the gas lights in her house are being dimmed while her husband tries to convince her that it's all in her head. Someone told me on Sunday that this film, Gaslight, is also, they're doing a remake of the film with Julia Roberts. So it'll be something to go out and look at. But gaslighting, it's taking place across a very broad spectrum in our day, isn't it? Uh, and it has become an effective tool to undermine the claims of another. The foundations of truth and justice have taken quite a few blows. And in the world of biblical truth, this is certainly the case. It seems to many that many have forgotten, right? The commandment, you shall not take the name of the Lord in vain. Because everywhere we look, there are examples of God being accredited for new expressions of truth, or being vilified for truth that some people just claim as being out of touch. And there is nothing new under the sun, right? This stuff is taking place all the time. And people want to put words in God's mouth. They want to make God say things that he's never really said. And yet, at the same time, the very words that he does say, we want to discount them or say that they're not relevant, they're not for today, they're parochial, whatever it is that we're saying, all of which is meant to just dismiss what God is really saying to us in these passages. So I think it's kind of interesting that these words now would be used in common day vocabulary, right? So here we have this word authentic. Now we've been engaged in a study of the New Testament letter of First John, and in this letter, the Apostle John is all about an authentic faith. It appears that false teachers in John's day were gaslighting those holding to the teachings of Jesus. And John calls them out. He calls them false teachers, and he calls out this new truth that they're spreading. And the effect that these teachers had was exacerbated by the fact that they were false teachers that at one time were a part of their own Christian community. So they came from not only from without. Sometimes, right, you can expect the criticism that comes from the outside, but from the inside, it just seems like why would you do that? You live in this community, and now you're working to undermine that community, and all because you think you know better than what the scriptures are teaching. So, like I said, nothing new under the sun. However, having moved on, remember John wrote, he says, they went out from us, but they were never really of us. For if they were of us, they would have stayed with us. They would have remained with us. In other words, they would have continued in this teaching that Jesus gave. But the fact that they left shows that they never really bought in. And so, having moved on, it was not before they left a wake of confusion and disunity behind them. And John now is doing cleanup on aisle 3. So let's turn to as we're looking at chapter 4. I just want to set a little bit of a context, looking back at chapter 3. So all this is going to lead as we continue through this passage. So, for example, in our culture right now, love, right, it's presented in all shapes and sizes. However, all too often, love is presented very subjectively, right? With little regard to the objective love that Jesus calls us to. And John now wants to clear the mist and declare exactly what love is. And this is an awesome passage for us to get this concept of objective truth and subjective realities, right? Something that is being stated explicitly, right? And then some that we just feel internally, right? So notice this expression, how we know, because it'll appear 4 times in just 4 verses. And as I told you before, when you get this theme that constantly rings over, you should pay attention to it, because I think the writer is trying to give you some insight into the direction in which he's going in his writings. So notice what he says here in verse 16. He says, "This is how we know what love is. Jesus laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers." See, what he's saying to you and me here is that love is sacrificial. Love is to be other centered. It's not so much what I love that defines, that gives meaning to that word. Right now, we're being given, this is what Jesus is calling love. This is what God is calling love. He's saying, listen, that Jesus would give his life a ransom for the sins of men. Remember, towards the end of Matthew, in the gospel, John is writing, towards the end of Matthew's gospel, Jesus begins to tell his disciples that the time is coming when he is going to be betrayed, and he's going to be handed over to the Gentiles, and they're going to mock him and flog him and ultimately, crucify him. And he says, and these things must come to pass. And despite all the protesting of the disciples saying, no, Lord, that'll never happen, he's saying, no, this has to happen. Jesus understood that he had come to destroy the works of the devil. He had come to pay the penalty for our sin, to do what we could not do on ourselves, and that is meet the righteous standard that God has. God isn't going to dismiss evil. God is going to judge it. And he judged the evil of mankind on the sacrifice of Jesus. So because of his sacrifice, you and I, we have a substitute. And his sacrifice on that tree has opened the door for opportunities for us. That's what this whole text is telling you and me. That's something that is out in the open, right? This is something that Jesus did. But notice that it's not just what Jesus did for my life. It's also what's going on inside of me. What's going on inside of me is that I then have to follow that example. So very often you'll ask people about, whether or not they believe, and the quick response is, oh, I believe in Jesus. I believe Jesus died for my sins. But you also notice that in this text and throughout this book that we've been looking at, if we say that we walk in the light, but we're walking in darkness, we don't practice the truth. So no matter how much we want to say, oh, well, Jesus died for me, that's only valid for the person who's really chasing after Jesus. It's saying here, we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers. Now, again, as I'm always quick to point out, this is not perfection, but this is all about intent. This is about you and I having this goal of being like Jesus, loving like Jesus. And that is giving expression to the faith that is inside of us. So this love is sacrificial, and this love is other-centered. Now he gives you an example of that. He says, listen, if anyone has material possessions and sees his brother in need but has no pity, has no pity on him, how can the love of God be in him? That word no pity, there's a Greek word, it's called splankthon. And it speaks about your bowels. It means, like for the ancient Greeks here, the splankthon, it spoke about like their bowels, because they're saying from deep within us, comes all kinds of expression of compassion and mercy, kindness, right? So like we talked about, it says it comes from the heart. Well, this word here says that they close their bowels off on these people. In other words, they close the door. They shut their heart. Their brother is in need, and they pay no attention. And here it's saying, listen, if we're going to lay down our lives for our brothers, and you're not even helping your brother, how's the love of God in you? That's always going to be a challenge, isn't it? Because sometimes the people in this world, man, they make it really hard to love. But there's also many passages too that aren't putting us all on a false guilt trip, in the sense that, sometimes Jesus says, you could only do what you can do. You're not responsible for people's responses. You're not responsible for the way in which they respond to your kindnesses. So as long as I'm just living with this notion that God has called me just to do the right thing, and at the end, sometimes it can be really disconcerting, sometimes it hurts, but you just got to shake it off and move on, because otherwise you're going to allow the world to conform you more and more into its image. So here he goes on and he says this in verse 18 and 19 of First John chapter 3. He says, "Dear children, do not," he says, "let us not love with words or tongue, but with actions and in truth." So again, here's a very objective look, right? It's saying love, as we was mentioned, was sacrificial and other centered, but here love is seen by putting truth into action, because we love with actions and in truth. The two of those things have to come together. Our understanding of God as it comes through the word, that is that's the basis on which we're building this life. But if we truly believe those things, they have to be seen in actions. This is not our faith isn't just something done with the lips. It's done with our whole life. That's one of the criticisms that the world often levies about the church, is that we talk a lot more than we produce. But it was the same in Jesus's day. Look at what this letter's all about. There were those who were going around claiming to know Jesus, to walk with God, and John saying, yeah, they're false prophets, they're false teachers. They really don't know what they're talking about. They're just leaving people in a whole lot of confusion and taking God's word and making it say something that it was never meant to say. So I get that, but the world is filled with hypocrites too. I'd much rather them come to church, because hopefully they'll hear something and it'll change them. It'll become obvious, like what's going on in their life, and we'll stop doing that. Like honestly, um, I understand that the world and its message is going to be antithetical to this message about Jesus, but the message of Jesus is calling us to love even your enemy, to go that second mile, right? So this, I hope, in our studies together, this isn't forcing us into some little, cloistered holy huddle. God called us to go into the world, not just be and not but not to be of the world. So I could go into the world with all of its craziness, but I could come and represent Jesus just like Jesus did. He did that. He was friends with tax collectors and sinners, but always seeking to build relationships that were redemptive. He didn't pal around with them and become like them. He was pointing them to the kingdom of heaven. And my friends, that's what you and I can do too. And every once in a while, it's not going to be well received. I get it. And it wasn't well received for Jesus. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, man, they came after him pretty hard, didn't they? And but yet his message turned the world upside down. To this day, no matter where you go in this world, there are witnesses of the power of the resurrection of Jesus. So here, notice this text then is saying our faith has to be seen in actions and in truth. That's something objective again. The objectiveness of these texts are telling me this is how I am to be living. It becomes like the ruler that I am measuring, my life. It's not something subjective, it's something objective. I'm looking at the way Jesus lived, and now I'm looking at my life, and the constant, call of God on my life is to reflect more and more of Jesus in this life, not to excuse it. And there's always this tension, right? Because I understand I'm not going to be perfect, but we ought to be chasing after it. We ought to be chasing after him. And so um, I want you to think about this love in action, this sacrificial, other-centered kind of love. And to do that, I want to bring you to another passage here, because one of the things that I like doing on our Seize the Day is to demonstrate how these messages they're also brought out in your whole New Testament. So I'm not making I'm not building a whole platform on one verse. What I'm trying to demonstrate is that this is the pattern throughout the scriptures, right? Because that's how cults are born. Cults are born. They take one little ounce of truth, and then they build something that after a while you don't even recognize it anymore. No, no, this is not the case with the New Testament. There is a consistent message that is brought through. So if you turn to Colossians 1:3-8, I'd like to just share a little bit of that with you this morning. Paul is writing to the Colossian believers, and he says, "We always thank God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, when we pray for you." And why does he say this? He says, "Because we have heard of your faith in Christ Jesus and the love you have for all the saints." So what prompted their prayers is the testimony that came back about these Colossian Christians. And you notice what they did? They they brought together not only the faith that they had in Jesus, but also the love that they were demonstrating to the saints. Isn't that exactly what John is saying here about about our love can't be just with words or tongue, but with actions and in truth? And then notice what he goes on to say. He says, the faith and love that spring from the hope that is stored up for you in heaven and that you have already heard about in the word of truth, the gospel that has come to you. So, this idea of this faith in Jesus and that prompted their love for all the saints came from what? This awakening that happened inside of them, this hope that was bound by this word of truth, the gospel, the good news that has come to them. So, do you notice that the objective truth, this gospel, this good news that Jesus has been preaching, that has become the source of hope? And out of that hope that was being declared, people put their faith in Jesus. And they also understood that if I am saying that I am a part of Jesus, it has to be seen in the way in which I'm living. You cannot take the two and separate them. Your faith has to be expressed in tangible works that we see. Faith and works, they are joined at the hip. Otherwise, our faith amounts to nothing. It's just words. We don't need that in the world in which we're living today. People need to see a concrete example of someone who lives a redeemed life, that they love Jesus. They are seeking to express him. And what I try to do in these Seize the Days is to give you all of the basis on why that call on our life is so valid. So here in Colossians, they're being praised for their faith and for their love and action, and all of which came from the word of truth, this gospel that has come to them. And then notice what else he says. All over the world, this gospel, all over the world, this good news is bearing fruit and growing, just as it has been doing among you since the day you heard it and understood God's grace in all of its truth. So, objective truth again. This message that came, they grabbed hold of that message and it changed them. But this message has also been changing people all over the world. Wherever this message has gone, people have been responding to it. So ever since the resurrection of Jesus, well, obviously through Jesus's ministry, but when Jesus resurrected, and now that great commission came to his disciples to go out and to go out into all the world and make disciples, the world has been responding to this message. And true, the world sometimes is going to reject it. It's going to put all kinds of obstacles and encumbrances in the way. Didn't they do that to Jesus? But Jesus demonstrated his power by overcoming death. In his program, all of this is going to eventually come to an end. Like, this world is destined to be redeemed. And so this is the hope that we have. And so I live every day with this assurance that Jesus is with me, that he is prompting me to become more and more like him. And then it says, listen, in verse 7, he says, you learned it from Epaphras, our dear fellow servant, who is a faithful minister of Christ on our behalf, and who also told us of your love in the Spirit. So again, this passage here in Colossians 3 through 8, notice that this word of truth, the good news, the gospel, right? They've heard it. They understood now something of God's grace, an objective truth that was supposed to have a subjective experience. And how did they hear it? They heard it through Epaphras, a faithful minister, a faithful servant of Jesus on their behalf, and who also told us of your love in the Spirit. So Epaphras has been telling them the good news and then going back and telling the apostles, hey, look what's happening here in Colossia. This past weekend, we baptized over 50 people throughout our campuses. Some of you were in Raymond, some of you were in Kittery Point and Greenland. In Greenland, I baptized like 39 people. I got quite the workout. And I'm telling you, the majority of those people were young adults. And I sat there with these young guys and girls coming, and they were like, 17, 24, 28, 30. All these young people coming in and professing their faith in Jesus. And I'm thinking, isn't this interesting? One of the things that we do at the end of the of our baptism services is we give people a big placard, and we ask them to write on there the influences that came into their life about how they heard about Jesus. And they're writing about aunts, mothers, fathers, granddads. They're writing about Sunday school teachers. Every once in a while, my name gets up there, or one of the pastors. But that always makes me smile, because I think, isn't this the truth? Like, I have my function, but the real impact that it's having on people on the day-to-day basis is by their friends and their relationships around them who are sharing Jesus. That's why what you do is so important. Going out there and sharing this good news about what Jesus is doing in your life. And if we share from that perspective, this is what's going on in my life because of my walk with Jesus, who's going to argue with that? That's your experience. But it's always based on this objective truth that Jesus has given to you and me. So don't be afraid. Just go out there and let them know that your reason why you are the way you are is because Jesus is present. And my friends, it was an amazing time to look and just see how all these people were responding. It's a great moment in the calendar of the church when we sit down and we see literally how God is bringing men and women to himself. And it was a great service. And we'll probably have some of those highlights online so that people can see them. But it was truly moving. But for today, you do realize then that this is all about this good news that is meant to change us from the inside out. Well, we're just getting started this week. So you're not going to want to miss this, because there's a lot of ways that this can go south. And John is not afraid to talk about them and to give us some insight on how we can keep this path going. So my friends, thank you so much for joining in today. Join in tomorrow as we continue our study, and we're going to take this all the way in through chapter 4, 1 through 6 this week, as we talk a little bit more about being authentic. All right. So thank you so much for joining me on this June 10th, and Lord willing, we'll spend some more time again tomorrow. God bless, my friends.